Hi, welcome to Defcon3. This is the time each week on FoxNews.com Live that we devote to looking deeper into the national security issues of the day. We're going to have an around-the-world tour, but we're going to start today by talking about Syria and Iran and Iran's nuclear weapons program. And joining me is Ambassador Mark Wallace, former United Nations ambassador, a man who's decided that he's so interested in stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program that he's in fact founded an organization for United Against a Nuclear Iran, right?
That's
so
right.
What is our website that we're supposed to look at?
www.uani.com, UANI.com. And thank you for having me on the show.
Okay, it's a great pleasure. Ambassador Mark Wallace. Now, I also want to join you in the conversation, too. So if you have any questions for the ambassador, send them to me via Twitter at KT McFarland, or join in the live chat with your questions for the ambassador. What I wanted to talk to you about, when you were at the United Nations, one of the things that you worried most about was Iran and a nuclear Iran. Get me up to date on where are we with a nuclear Iran? Where did it start? When did we first become worried about it? And what have we done to stop them?
You know, the problem of a nuclear-armed Iran has been around since really the start of the Iranian Revolution in 1978, 1979. And through the course of that time, we've seen Iran slowly ramp up its capability in the area. And now I think is a really key time. We've seen Iran begin to enrich uranium to a highly enriched point that is only a few yards away, if you will, from perfecting highly enriched uranium for a nuclear bomb. My friend Graham Allison, who you know so well, uses a football analogy, and he says, if you start on your own 20-yard line, you have to travel 80 yards to get to the end zone. To use the football analogy, Iran is now in the red zone, meaning they're on our 10-yard line, and if the goal line is a nuclear weapon, they aren't far away because the practical and intellectual difficulties in developing a nuclear bomb, they're getting very close.
Okay, so what do you need for a nuclear bomb? You need enriched uranium, which you said they're at the 90-yard line.
Right, you need enriched uranium, you need to be able to weaponize it, you need to be able to have a delivery system. Those are the key parts, but from our perspective, the most challenging aspect of that is obviously perfecting the nuclear fuel cycle in such a manner that you can turn uranium out of the ground into highly enriched uranium, into fissile material.
So you can put on the top of a missile.
Exactly, and turn it into a bomb, and then the delivery mechanisms and the missile systems. Iran already has a pretty developed missile capability. As you hear once in a while, Iran launches off missiles, as a threat. So the difficulty aspect of that is weaponization, miniaturization, putting it onto a missile and delivering it. But the key technical challenges have always been that nuclear fuel cycle. And Iran is getting very close.
All right, now we've had sanctions. You were part of initial sanctions when you were at the United Nations, and we have more sanctions now. Do you think they're effective? Or?
I do think that they are effective, and I think it's important. Look, any serious foreign policy related to Iran has to include four things. And there's a lot of bickering back and forth about, preparing for military option or diplomacy, all this business. Any serious foreign policy would have a diplomatic component where you attempt to have reach out, a sanctions pressure component in order to pressure them, special operations, whether it's the computer viruses that we've heard so much about, even some of the accidents that have befallen nuclear scientists in Iran, and frankly, military planning. So I believe that any serious policy, regardless of administration, should include those four areas. So do I think, as we exclusively do sanctions because we're a private group, that sanctions will only be the silver bullet? I do not. But I do think that the economic pressure and the economic duress that the regime has been under has certainly pushed it back to the negotiating table. Whether it will be successful or not, I remain skeptical but hopeful. Okay,
now I want you to stay right there, and we're going to be joined by Dominic DiNatale, who's a Fox News genius, war correspondent, brave guy who we usually see in a flak jacket and a helmet. He's not wearing those today, which makes me a little nervous. But Dominic is joining us to talk about the fact that there are new concerns that al-Qaeda might be infiltrating the ranks of the Assad opposition in Syria. The fighter jets are bombing Syria's largest city. Israeli officials are concerned about Syria's chemical weapons, and artillery shells are falling dangerously close to that Israeli-Syrian border in the Golan Heights. Our own Dominic DiNatale is there to tell us the latest. So, Dominic, without your helmet and flak jacket, tell us what's going on the Syrian border.
Hey there, Katie. Good to see you. Let's talk about al-Qaeda first and how easy it could be for al-Qaeda really to infiltrate the rebels. basic fact is the majority of the rebels are Sunnis that are actually fighting what is effectively a Shia-related regime. And given the amount of animosity, sectarian-wise, it is easy for al-Qaeda to drum up some degree of support. Now, the kind of attacks we've actually seen in Syria, the suicide bombings and things like that, these are archetypal attacks and tactics by al-Qaeda. We've seen them down in Damascus, we've seen them elsewhere around the country. It's not clear just what scale the al-Qaeda fighting force might be there, and seeing that we've only had, I would say, a handful, perhaps half a dozen of al-Qaeda-style attacks, it depends how many more we'll see in the future. It depends how much support, really, the Sunnis amongst the rebels are prepared to give them. But today, just an incredible counter-strike from the Assad regime in the northern city of Aleppo. This is the largest city. It's the commercial hub. It's a large support network for Assad. It's where he gets most of his money from that's been able to prop up the machine. You've been talking about the fighter jets. It's the first time, I believe, that fighter jets have actually been used against the people. Using guns, we've seen video of the fighter jets using guns. There were loud explosions in the city yesterday. We're not sure whether they were dropping heavenly weaponry on those sites, but we do know a lot of the fighters being focused around the old citadel. That is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Goodness knows if that will survive. But the government is so vehement in eradicating the rebel presence there, because basically, if Aleppo falls, the regime will fall much faster. It will lose that money lifeline. It will lose that crucial support network. Down in Damascus as well, we've seen a resounding response as well. Heavy artillery waking people up at 3 o'clock in the morning as it pounds the remaining rebel positions there after the rebels swept through the city last week. People, hundreds of families, fleeing for their lives, heading for the borders. Big problem now, Turkey has closed its border, Katie, after several supply trucks were hit by some form of attack. Where are those refugees left to go? It's turning into a colossal crisis now. The civil war out of control. 18,000 dead, say the activists, Katie.
All right, well, Dominic, Syria admitted this week that it does have weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, that it would use against any kind of foreign intervention. Can you tell us about a report from where you are on the Golan Heights, which is the Israeli-Syrian border? Are they really distributing gas masks to the residents in that region?
Not in this region, but down in Jerusalem, we are hearing that from the government that requests for gas masks have doubled in the past 24 hours. There's really quite a lot of rhetoric and, quite frankly, scaremongering by Israeli politicians is being drummed out about the fact that if Syria loses its weapons to the likes of Hezbollah and other Islamic extremist groups, it will be forced to act. Now, the Israeli government does, as a policy, hand out gas masks to those because of tensions in the past. It doesn't really have enough money to give every single Israeli citizen a gas mask, and I think that is actually going to worry people here. It's stirring up a degree of panic, and especially now that one of the long-standing allies of the Assad regime, Russia, is saying it would be unacceptable if Syria used those chemical weapons. I think that's really just going to add more and more to the anxiety and apprehension in the region, Katie.
All right, well, Dominic DiNatale, and in the Golan Heights, which is the supposedly demilitarized zone between Israel and Syria, and a part of the world that's been fought over for 3,000 years. Stay safe, Dominic. We're going to go to a break and then come back with Ambassador Mark Wallace. Hi, welcome back to Defcon3. Again, please join the conversation and send us your comments or questions via Twitter at KT McFarland or the live chat. Now, Ambassador Mark Wallace, you're a guy who's been following Iran and Iran's nuclear weapons program, but particularly the Iran-Syrian connection. Syria looks like it's about to fall, according to Dominic DiNatale, who's right there on the border. It could be a matter of days, weeks, maybe months. What happens if Iran loses its main strategic ally in that region?
Well, there's been so much talk about Syria and whether or not the Assad regime will fall. What's a little bit overlooked is the fact that the fight for Syria is in many ways about a much larger fight in the region, and that's the growing presence and role of Iran, who has been intent upon regional hegemony to dominate that region. And obviously its close ally in Syria has been a proxy for Iran's interests. That's why you've seen Iran funding weapons, other support to the Assad regime. So as many of the states are calling for Assad to step down, Iran has been continuing to supply and support that regime. So if the Assad regime falls, but by all accounts, we all hope that that will happen, I think you will see Iran look for other outlets for its regional domination. It has already had a presence in a well-known presence in Lebanon through its terror proxy Hezbollah, which is the dominant political party in Lebanon right now. And I think you've read of late that Iran, what was once really a relationship to support Hezbollah, has now become more symbiotic. Iran needs Lebanon and Hezbollah even more because its key ally Assad is no longer as reliable. So I think you'll see Iran triangulate to Lebanon in order to have other methods of dissemination of its bad activities throughout the region.
Yeah, so it wants to stay in the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
We've got, as you know, the great thing about this is that everybody's in this conversation together.
Sure.
And we've gotten several comments and questions from David Larson. He says, talk about Syria. If it does end up being a civil war, what's the threat to Israel? You've talked about a proxy fight between Shiite and Sunni, Iran and the Sunni countries in the region. Where's Israel in all this?
Well, you know, it's a tough, obviously it's a tough issue for Israel. Israel is surrounded historically by countries that have not always been friendly to it, and it's a real problem. And I think the Israelis have grappled with the Assad regime potential fall. Initially, the Israelis were quiet about it.
Right. They didn't,
because as difficult as the Assad regime is and as terrible a leader he was, Syria was basically stable, and there was less conflict between Israel and Syria under the Assad regime. Doesn't mean he's a horrible leader, a horrible dictator, obviously willing to brutalize his own people. But Israel has definitely come around and said it is much better for Assad to fall now. So the question is, what's next? If Iran continues to have a proxy in Syria and it's unstable and it allows weapons and fighters to impress on Israel to distract from the problems of Syria, you could have a major problem for Israel. So the question is, we're not sure. We hope that something stable, a democratically elected government in Syria that is a responsible government, replaces the Assad regime that will, hopefully honor some of the peace accords that have been out there and be a true negotiating interlocutor with Israel. I worry about it. You
don't sound very optimistic.
It's a very, if we were both in the Israeli government, I think we would be truly worried.
Yeah. And so I was struck by what you said about Iran's goal is hegemony in the region. In other words, it wants to be the tough guy in the whole neighborhood, really from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Are nuclear weapons a separate goal, part of that goal? To do one without the other?
I think it's absolutely part of it. If you think about the last 35, 37 years during the time of the Iranian Revolution, there's been no more intractable state actor, more sponsorship of terrorism than out of Iran. Just recently in Bulgaria, you've seen a horrible incident of a bomber killing a bunch of Israeli tourists. Even here in the United States, there was an attempted assassination on the Saudi ambassador. You've seen this happen in a variety of places through its proxy Hezbollah. And what they're trying to do is through money, because of their petrodollars, weapons and other things, spread their influence in order to dominate the region. They viewed themselves as a preeminent culture and that they want regional domination. Now, if you're willing to engage in terror, sell weapons, provide money and financing to bad groups, and willing to flex your muscles in the region, do you become emboldened or less emboldened if you have a nuclear weapon? Imagine how emboldened Iran becomes when and if they obtain a nuclear weapon. Truly a dangerous circumstance because Iran, we believe, will only be far more emboldened, and I think you'll see that their bad activity only increase.
All right, one last question. Are we getting to the point where we have just two lousy options, bomb Iran, let Iran get the bomb, or is there still time for some third option?
Well, I think that right now, when we were talking earlier, I think that you have to have the military option on the table.
Right.
And I think,
otherwise, nothing else is
correct. And I think it's important, as I said, the Syria's foreign policy contains military planning, a credible threat of military action, particularly an intractable regime, real economic pressure on regimes that are vulnerable to it. And we've seen the impact of sanctions. It's had a profound effect on the Iranian economy. We track the rial, the Iranian currency, on our website. And even just after the SWIFT campaign, which was a Belgian society that provided banking systems, once that was taken away and sanctioned, the Iranian currency fell by some 60, 70%. Inflation's enormous in the country. International business is fleeing that economy. the regime thugs control that economy. So to the extent that you can cut off their lifeblood of money and support, you can potentially pressure them to change their behavior.
So you change their behavior, or you get the Iranian people out into the streets and change the regime?
Yes.
Either one?
Either one. I think that's why military planning, it has to be credible. And with my friends in the Obama administration, I would respectfully say the president has to speak to a credible military threat. At the outset of his administration, I think there was too much politics involved, and he famously gave his outstretched hand.
Friendship,
right. I think that he should have said that, and at the same time said some of the things he said about a credible military threat now that he should have said then. Because the Iranians need to hear it and believe it, and we need to continue to pressure them. We've called for a full economic blockade, a full oil blockade on Iran, and we've debated that in the United States and the European Union. How credible is it? Just a few months ago, 8 months ago, we were unwilling to sanction the Central Bank of Iran. We've now sanctioned the Central Bank of Iran because we thought it would have a systemic effect on the global financial system. If you're not willing to take the tough step of sanctioning the Central Bank of Iran, do you think that the mullahs believe that we would bomb their country?
Yeah.
So I think that you have to do all these policies in concert and be serious and avoid the partisan bickering and focus on a serious policy that will hopefully have Iran change its behavior, and if not, be prepared, God forbid, for military action.
Okay, so in other words, they've got to become convinced it's either their necks or their nukes before they give up their nukes.
Or their economic necks. And I think that we're doing the economic necks now. We can do much better. For example, why don't we have an economic blockade? Why is any oil being shipped out of Iran? Since the oil sanctions on Iran, Libya has come back online. Iraq is pumping more barrels of oil than Iran ever did. And Saudi Arabia is committed to pumping more oil. The oil markets can handle it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Mark Wallace. Thanks for unwrapping that enigma.